Welcome back. Let me set the stage for you for our next discussion on how COVID-19 has affected climate change, or the climate crisis that we already found ourselves in humanity even before COVID-19. All right, let me just give you a few numbers over here. So according to the International Energy Agency, it says that this year we will not use 6% of the normal gas that we normally use. In fact, another different brief, that's according to Carbon Brief, another research I was reading, for them, they actually put it between 4 to 8% estimate of the energy that we will not be using this year in terms of warming gas. Just to even put it in perspective to you, that's about 2 to 3 billion tons of warming gas that we will not use this year because of COVID-19 and how that has affected it. That's why when we were just taking that break, I told you that no war, no recession, no pandemic, not even the influenza that we saw has ever had an effect on climate change that we've seen in the past few days. But nevertheless, having clear skies, lockdown cities, no transport happening, experts still say we have a long way to go when it comes to fighting climate change. So helping us have this conversation is John Kioli. John Kioli is the chairman of the Kenya Climate Change Working Group here in Kenya. John, thank you so much for your time this morning. And just having already set the table for our viewers, let's just dive into this and let me find out from you, what do our air intake look like as globally, definitely, and as a country? What does our carbon footprint look like right now before and after COVID-19?
Thank you very much, Zinzi, for inviting me. I'm really honored to be in this session today. And good morning, Kenyans. I would want to say that the world that business as usual is producing close to 36 billion tons of carbon emissions annually. So we are looking at a scenario whereby all this is pumped into the air, and this affects us because the greenhouse gases, which include carbon dioxide, nitrous oxide, hydrofluorocarbons, and others, are affecting our livelihoods every day. And you can see, if we continue business as usual, we'll have continued floods, continued, famine, and all this affecting our health and environment in a sense. When we come to Kenya, we look at, out of that, we are producing about 73 million tons of carbon emissions equivalent every year. And when we look at this, we are looking at about 1% of that emission is produced in Kenya. So it's quite significant if you look at what carbon emissions have been cut down because of the COVID-19 pandemic. Over the 100 years or so before, the temperatures have increased to between 0.5 to 2 degrees centigrade over the 100 years. So we are seeing a scenario whereby
All right, we seem to have lost John there. We'll try and get John. He was just helping us understand why it is that despite the fact that we have clear skies and halted cities, why is it that global warming doesn't seem to be slowing down? He was just helping us understand the research that I was giving to you earlier. The fact that the International Energy Agency says that this year we will use less than 6% of the warming gas that we normally use. Carbon Brief, another report that I was reading, said that we will not be using 4 to 8% of the warming gas that we normally use. Just to even put it in perspective, that's an entire country's energy. That is that of India as well. So John was just helping us understand that. We'll get John in just a minute. But even as that is happening, we're trying to get John, the other thing that we also want to understand from him is how the fact that despite that we're having clear skies and halted cities, how this is also affecting factories. For example, rice. Rice in itself is a staple food to over 3.2 billion people on this world. That small little grain of rice is causing food insecurity, with factories having to close down. So there's a bit of paradox in that, saying factories closed down, but the same thing, factories closing down has really helped us with our air issue. On top of that, Ibra, Let's take a quick commercial break and try and get John. When we come back, we'll continue this discussion with him. All right, thank you so much for sticking with us. John is still with us. John, before we had that slight interruption, you are helping us understand a few critical things. John Kioli is the chairman of the Kenya Climate Change Working Group. John, you're helping us understand, why is it the fact that we are having clear skies and lockdown in cities? Why is it that global warming hasn't gone down? Why? That's where you were sort of explaining, taking us
Yeah,
through.
I was explaining that in Kenya we produce about 1% of the emissions that are there in the universe. This is close to 73 million carbon emission equivalent. And this is quite significant if you look at the whole world. So when we come down to COVID-19 and the gains, of course, there are quite a number of challenges we have gotten into because of COVID-19. But in terms of climate change, we are seeing a drop of close to 1,600 million tons of carbon emissions equivalent. This is close to about 5.5% of emissions which have been cut down. Zinzi, remember that about 40% of the factories, like in China, in Japan, in the United States of America, were closed down.
Right.
And this gave the world some breathing space whereby you can see big cities like, Delhi, like Wuhan, like Milan, and New York City. You can actually see, and the nitrous oxide levels have actually significantly dropped, meaning that the air is cleaner, the air is better, and we are looking at cut down of 5.5%, which is quite significant if you look at 36 billion tons of carbon emissions that are emitted every year.
Right. And John, research shows that the biggest thing that has seen the reduction of carbon during these past few months is the reduction of traffic flow. Traffic flow, be it in terms of air transport or road transports. Just as a climate expert, just help us understand how traffic flow has sort of impacted our climate as it is right now. And that traffic flow, of course, we know has been halted due to the COVID-19 and the lockdowns that we've been seeing across the world. But just help us understand how that traffic flow, be it air or road, how that has affected the climate crisis.
Thank you very much. You must be aware that the aviation industry, for the first time, not even the World War, not even the recessions, have ever slowed down the way COVID-19 has slowed down the aviation industry.
Right.
You all know that all the planes are down. You all know that most of the countries have done a lockdown, so most of the cars are parked. You all know that even in the shipping industry, the marine industry also closed down to some extent in terms of the emission that was being emitted. You know that this sector computes to about 30% of the emissions that are there in the atmosphere. And then you look at also industries which emit quite significant, and also issues of agriculture, issues of energy. You are talking about in the cooking industry, you're also talking about forest destruction. You're talking about all these emissions have been actually slowed down by the pandemic, which has been with us since December last year. So it's quite significant. And we are seeing a drop down in terms of, nitrous oxide, which is quite harmful, and the methane, and also carbon dioxide, which is now quite limiting. And this is now linking to international process, Zinzi, that you all know that Kenya is a signatory to the Paris Agreement, which was signed in 2015, but ratified in Kenya in 2016, and the tools were presented in New York in 2017. What that Paris Agreement says in Article 2(1)(a) is that the whole world is targeting to cut down their emissions to 1.5%. This is quite something because COVID has actually helped us achieve this. If you look to the document, Article 4(a) talks about the national determined contributions whereby all the countries have agreed we are going to cut down our emissions to this extent.
Right.
Kenya agreed to cut down by 30%.
Right.
This has been achieved by some extent.
So, John, here's the thing. What policies would you like to see coming out to support climate change here in Kenya? What policies would you want to see our lawmakers put in place, especially after COVID-19?
Thank you very much. Kenya is a front runner in terms of climate change policies and legislation. We were the first country after South Africa to come up with a climate change legislation, which is the Climate Change Act 2016, which was signed by our president. We have the National Climate Change Action Plan. We also have the National Climate Change Policy Framework and other regulations which are there in the country. The challenge now is issues of implementation, issues of rolling out, and issues of making sure that also the county governments are in the picture in terms of these policies that are there.
So, John, what I'm hearing from you is that, yes, we already have these policies in place, but the issue is implementing them, rolling them out. So we already have some of these policies in place, the issue is rolling out and implementation. How do we go about that? So 2 years from now, six months from now, when we're talking about locusts and perhaps a drought or a flood, we're not here back to square one talking about policies being made.
It's sad because, you know, like the Climate Change Act 2016 was enacted in 2016, and yet some of the, you know, issues are still pending. We are looking at also issues of, you know, the National Climate Change Action Plan, which was, you know, is still yet to be signed. But what is more critical is like looking at climate change legislation from a county perspective. Mm-hmm. Most of the counties, if you look at Wajir, Mandera, Machakos, Kitui, Kajiado, and other counties, have started or have completed legislation on climate change issues. And this is very fundamental because we are looking at how funds can be, how CIDPs can incorporate issues of climate change, and money is allocated and actually activities are rolled down in terms of climate change. So right. We are looking at this as an addition to what is happening now.
Right. And here's the thing, John, before I do let you go, the paradox of it all, and we were talking about factories earlier, 3.5 billion people around the world rely rather on rice as a staple food. But some of this, now this rather is being, we are actually even here as a country seeing food insecurity with the pandemic and our factories closing down. So a paradox, you would say somewhat, our factory is closing down, yes, our air is cleaner, but on this other side, food security is at jeopardy. With, for example, I've given you an example with just rice being a staple food around the world, 3.5 billion people having to rely on this, but with factories being closed, food security is being an issue. As a climate expert rather, how do you address that? How do you answer to that paradox?
I think what we must be alive to is that Kenya has ratified several legislation like the Climate Change Act, Paris Agreement, the National Climate Change Action Plan. All these talk to one thing, that as a country, we need to develop in a low carbon pathway. And that's why we are linking this to food security, whereby we are looking at issues, we are looking at how we can produce food in a low carbon pathway, how we can do things in a sustainable way. And this we are mirroring to SDG 7, which is Sustainable Development Goals, in terms of clean cooking. And this is one thing I wanted to bring forth, that in the world, about 3 billion people do not have or are using what we call open fires or the three-stone jiko. And about 4 million people are dying annually because of air pollution-related diseases. Mm-hmm. Now, when we look at this, we know that right now there's a finance bill of 2020 in Parliament that is awaiting reading on the 9th of this month. One of the clear things is that Article 35 is being deleted, which is speaking to one addition. That is talking. Once it's deleted, it means solar equipment, wind equipment will be taxed. Number two, Article 45 now will be deleted, meaning that we will have cook stoves, and any production of cook stove related things having VAT. What that will affect is, one, it will affect the health sector.
Right.
The government will put more resources on health sector.
Right.
The government will put more resources on education sector because solar lanterns, solar equipment will not be there for children. And more important, our economy will not grow because there are town centers, there are homes being
Right.
run by solar that are going to be without solar equipment because of VAT.
John, I'm afraid our time is up, but this being my last question to you, what do you think about 5G implementation as a climate expert? Why do I ask this? A few people, experts, are differing on this, that 5G implementation has critical precautions towards living beings, whether it is humans, plants and animals, etc. So as a climate expert, what are your thoughts on the implementation of 5G? Do you welcome it?
Well, technology is a major thing in terms of implementation of issues of climate change. Technology is critical in terms of reaching out, information sharing, information implementation, and reaching out to masses. Quite a lot has been said about 5G. I'm not very sure how this will affect issues of climate change, but I'm looking at it from a positive direction that we'll be able to get information like climate change information faster. We'll be able to jumpstart even businesses that are related to climate change. We'll be able to get, more people in activities of climate change. But as I conclude, Zinzi, one thing is the lesson learned from COVID-19 in terms of climate change is, one, we have options. We didn't know that Zoom, Skype, and other products are there in the market. Zoom shot from 10 million users to about 300 million users. This tells you that these meetings that we were attending, the long-haul flights, are now being replaced by Zoom and Skype and other means of communication.
Right.
Transport sector has also been seen, there are alternatives of traveling road. Now we can do this and cheaper and almost free by meeting and doing this. But again, it has affected like international protocols, like the UNFCCC engagement, which was supposed to be held in Bonn in June, and also in Scotland in December.
Yes.
These are definitely going to be affected. And long term, we are looking at what options can we do long term, like provision of water to the people, provision of good sanitation, because all these are linked to issues of climate change. If we don't have provision of running water and more permanent, not just drums of water which are just put there within a short time. We are looking at counties now, look at it in terms of long term.
All right, thank you so much, John. That is John Kioli. John Kioli is the chairman of the Kenya Climate Change Working Group, just giving us an overview of how COVID-19 has impacted climate. He says that the best way to make sure that we also attain food security is to make sure that we continue, yes, providing food, but in a sustainable way. And of course, him adding that here in the country, we already have policies. Implementation is the biggest challenge, and that we should implement policies at a county perspective to make sure that it is drilled.